Spud here, and today's topic is a track that many of us in Phoenix Racing had a love-hate relationship with. I'm talking about Martinsville. Our experience there was a bit like finally getting that bad girl you've always had a thing for to go out with you, only to find out that she wasn't so much a bad girl as she was a complete psycho, albeit a hot one, who keyed your car and slashed your tires in the parking lot. And that was before you'd even made it into the restaurant on that first date. Phoenix Racing would usually arrive with a pretty decent car, especially for a small team who only raced in the Cup Series a few races each year. It was guaranteed we'd run the speedway races at Daytona and Talladega, and we'd almost always show up at the Brickyard because it had such a big purse. And there was a good chance we might run Richmond or Darlington. But then there was Martinsville. Let me just take a little sip of coffee here. Martinsville is a little over a half-mile track that was built in 1947 and held its first NASCAR race on September 25, 1949. I looked up that race on Racing Reference, and Red Byron was the winner in the 1949 Oldsmobile out of a 15-car field, of which only 5 were still running at the finish. It's the only track we race on that has been on the Cup Series circuit for NASCAR's entire history. It changed from dirt to pavement in 1955, and its corners were changed to concrete in 1976. Speaking of those corners, they are narrow and they are flat. And with that and its long straightaways, the place resembles a big old paper clip. If any of you folks have ever seen the 1973 movie, The Last American Hero, starring a young Jeff Bridges, Martinsville was the track at the end of the race where a local boy makes good and shows the world he is someone to reckon with in NASCAR. The movie was based on Tom Wolfe's essay about Junior Johnson that appeared in Esquire in 1965. Today, we'll be running the Subway 500, the second race at Martinsville in 2005. As usual, I'm relying on the classic NASCAR Racing 2003 sim, and I'd like to give a shout out to Team SBR for their 2005 Cup Series Carset. I've done my best to match up the drivers and the sponsors from the real race lineup right down to Virginia native Hermie Sadler's Kilgore for Governor Paint Job for that event. Just because I like interjecting a little history into these things, Jerry Kilgore, a Republican, was the Attorney General of Virginia in 2005, who lost his bid for the governorship to Democrat Tim Kaine. And Hermie, whose last race in the Cup Series was the 2018 First Data 500 at, where else, Martinsville, threw his own hat in the ring and ran unsuccessfully in the primary for Virginia's State Senate in 2023 against Emily Brewer. But as usual, I digress. In our simulated race today, it's Jimmy Johnson in the 48 car who was starting on the pole. In the real race, it was Tony Stewart. In the sim, Bobby was 10th quick in the first practice, qualified 26th, and was also 26th in happy hour. In real life, Bobby was 14th in P1, 13th in P2, and 20th in happy hour. Not bad. Not bad at all. Qualifying was rained out, and so we started 37th on owner's points. We had Bobby Hamilton behind the wheel for that 2005 race. Mark Reno had me email Jeff White, who was Bobby's chief engineer at Bobby Hamilton Racing, and told me to get the down low on where Bobby wanted to start Martinsville setup-wise. I am looking at a copy of that email right now. A 400-pound left front spring and a 450 right front. 250 in the left rear, 650 in the right. 4 degrees left caster, 6 degrees right. An 1 3/4 bar, 51% front percentage, 53% wedge, and the rear track bar at 11 and 9. Jeff also told me, but in person, not in the email, that we were going to love working with Bobby, and he wasn't wrong about that. Bobby was another one of those old school guys that we loved at Phoenix Racing. A guy who hadn't had it all just handed to him and knew as much about working on the cars as he did about driving them. I'm talking about guys like him, Jimmy Spencer, Sterling Marlin. Like I said, old school. And we've got our first caution today on lap 6. The first of 19 cautions came out on lap 45 in the real race. Cautions are something you get a lot of at Martinsville. We spent 113 laps under yellow that day. That's 22.6% of the race for you statistics junkies. Let's see if we can find out what happened. Uh-oh. It looks like Casey Kane in the 9 car got into the back of Mike Bliss in the 0 car and spun him. Here's the view from the inside of Casey's car. Yup, he done gave Mike an old-fashioned atomic wedgie. Now let's get back to Jeff White, or as I like to call him, Old Possum Breath. Jeff, a native of Nashville, Tennessee, is one of the smartest, most common-sense engineers I know, and he, along with Dale Ferguson, who was Bobby Jr.'s engineer when he drove the 25 car for Team Renzi, were the 2 guys I could always go to if I found myself needing help or advice. Jeff had a gift for simplifying a vehicle dynamics problem in such a way that even a dunderhead like myself could get a grasp on what was going on. That is, if he talked real slow. I've still got this guy way up on a pedestal. Before I forget, if you're enjoying this video, heck, even if you aren't, why don't you do old Uncle Spud a favor and hit that subscribe button down in the corner? Go ahead. Do it. Don't make me resort to any Jedi mind tricks. Do it. And like the video too. No, you don't want any death sticks. The car we took to this race was chassis 041, another Billy Hess 1.5-inch drop snout that was a Nextel Cup big brother to chassis 025, the car I talked about in my video on our first win at Richmond in the spring of 2001. Chassis 041 was a really good car on these kinds of short tracks. In point of fact, the year before in the Fall Cup race at Richmond, Mike Wallace led the race for 45 laps in this car. You may recall that 2004 was the first year for the Chase for the Championship format, and Richmond was the race where the 10 drivers in the chase made the cut. Jamie McMurray was the first of the guys who ended up also-rans for the rest of the season, and we were a part of the reason for that when we passed him to finish 7th place in that race. His spotter said he was begging for us not to pass, but he had a cylinder going down, so we did the humane thing and put him out of our misery. What can I say? Finishing in the top 10 at a cup race was a big deal for us, and 7th place pays better than 8th, or 9th place, which is where Jamie ended up after Greg Biffle also got around him. By the way, in this simulated race, Mike's the car ahead of us in that red and white number 4 Lucas Oil Products Chevrolet. The right front spindle on 041 for this race was not the 6-degree spindle we had run on it up until the end of 2004. In 2005, Johnny Sauter drove our number 1 Busch car in a few cup races that year too. He turned us on to this little old right front spindle that he just loved, and boy was it something. We had it on the car that year when we slapped the crap out of the whole field in our win at Milwaukee. But Milwaukee is a story for another video at some other point. The distance, center to center, between the upper and lower ball joints on our 6-degree spindle was about 11 3/4 inches. It had a 1 11/16 drop top and a 1-inch drop bottom. By way of reference, the distance between ball joints on a standard 8-degree spindle is about 12 5/8 inches. This little spindle that Johnny brought to the table wasn't but 10 3/8 of an inch between the ball joints, and it was all off the top. 2 1/8 inch off the top to be exact. That sucker looked like it had come off a Pinto. Holy smokes, would the car cut with that thing on it though. We ended up with it on all our drop snouts, Busch and Cup. caution has just come out again on lap 16, and I think we know why. We just drove past Stanton Barrett in the 95 car, and he was pointed in a direction that is not normally associated with forward progress on the racetrack. Let's go to the replay. Tony Stewart in the 20 car was in third place on that last restart. Stanton started on the inside in an effort to get his lap back, and now Tony has gotten hung up behind him in the outside lane and has fallen back to 10th place as cars sail by in the lower lane. I imagine that old Smoke is using the English language in rather creative ways inside his helmet at this point. I figure that Stanton is sitting there and wishing that Tony had better anger management skills. Our best finish ever in a cup race at this track was 22nd with Regan Smith in 2013. Phoenix Racing's best finish ever at Martinsville was 11th in the Busch race there in 2006 with Mike Wallace driving. Martinsville had been on the Xfinity schedule from 1982 to 1994. And then that race in 2006 was the sole Xfinity race until NASCAR put the track back on the schedule in 2020. Oh my, the memories. We were used to trying to get out of the track after a cup race, and even though it took a fair while to get the hauler loaded, it could still take close to an hour from the time you climbed in the van in team parking until you got to Highway 58, which was the road that passed by the track. This wasn't the case at that Busch race. It was a standalone race, just us, no cup. You could have held the gas pedal to the floor after that race. There wasn't hardly anyone there. Traffic is no longer an issue for the Xfinity guys. But that's because we now race at night and they make us park the haulers next to this building that's like a mile away. And by the time the drivers have finally pulled the haulers back onto the track, gotten the doors dropped, and we finally pulled all our equipment from pit lane in the infield and gotten it and the cars loaded, there ain't no one up but the local Animal Life and Crystal Methodists. We took good old 025 to that Busch race. NASCAR had a rule that the body panels had to be at least 24 gauge. That is, a minimum thickness of .025 inches thick. I think Mark Reno, our crew chief, might have rubbed on that page until his thumb smudged the ink a bit because our body was 28 gauge, which is more like .015. We had to be super careful even pushing that car around the garage. Anyway, one of the officials put his hand on the car and dented the fender. He gave Chuck Myers, our car chief, a long, cold stare that just screamed, "J'accuse!" Well, Chuck kind of gets up in the official's grill and says, "Why'd you dent our car?" Needless to say, NASCAR started checking body thickness again right after that. Finally, our simulated race is going back to green. Let's get back to old honest Chuck. Geez, I can't even say that without rolling my eyes. Anyway, he and I had a little thing we would do pretty much week in and week out. When you rolled across NASCAR's scales for tech, you were allowed to have the driver's helmet and the radio inside the car. You could take the radio out after you were through tech and take it back to the hauler and plug it back into the battery charger. Well, Chuck would lean into the car to remove the radio, but little did the officials know that we also had a 5-pound chunk of lead wrapped in electrical tape and concealed in the door panel. I'd be standing with my back to Chuck, looking like I was trying to figure out which direction I needed to go to get to church, and old Chucky would quick slip his hand behind his back and give me the lead. I would then put it into my back pocket and start casually walking away. Well, one time I forgot to wear a belt. I took maybe 3 steps and my pants slid halfway down to my knees. It's kind of hard to look innocent when you were holding your pants up by your belt loops. We stayed in Danville for most of the earlier races. I liked that town. It was the home of the AAF Armor Museum. I always intended to stop by there at some point, but from what I understand, the doors are closed now. Note to self, don't put things off. Which reminds me, I figure to be heading to Martinsville come the end of May. The 14th annual Rooster Walk will be going on from May 23 through 26 at Pop's Farm in Martinsville. It is a must-see music and arts festival if you are in the area. Emmylou Harris, Corey Wong, and Dogs in a Pile are just 3 of the many great bands that will be performing. Anyway, one time when we were staying in Danville, Joey Register, who was our tower guy and had been around forever, even worked for Bud Moore for a long time, and Eddie Pearson, that's David Pearson's youngest son, dragged me and a couple other teammates with them to dinner at this little hole-in-the-wall eatery/tavern that they knew about. The next morning, I couldn't and still can't tell you the name of the place, or where it was located, or what I'd had for dinner, or how much I'd had to drink, especially how much I'd had to drink. All I can remember is that I had a very enjoyable time. I can remember a less enjoyable time. That was the Spring Martinsville Cup race in 2009. We got here with a fast car. Sterling Marlin was driving for us, and we ended up 13th on the board for the first practice. We were easily going to make the show. Then it started to get wet. I remember being kind of grumpy as I was trying to set up our scale pads in the rain. And I mean the rain was really starting to fall now. I hadn't bothered to bring any rain gear, so I had to improvise. And then right before qualifying, the deluge really hit and wiped that session out. We were the first car to go home. Oh well, it happens in big-time racing. It looks like this long caution is just about over, and we're fixing to go back to green again. And the yellow comes right back out. And unfortunately, our car smacking the wall is what brought it out. Let's go to the replay. It looks like Matt Kinsley from the 17 done us in. Maybe after that fall 2007 race when Carl Edwards made like he was going to punch Matt. He was just saying he was still cheesed off about how Matt knocked Bobby out of the simulated race I'm filming in 2024. Looks like Bobby is pulling into his pit. Let's check his in-car. Yeah, you hit the wall at that angle, you've probably bent the suspension on that left front. You might even have done some damage to the front clip. We weren't racing for points back then, so it definitely would have ended our day. I want to see this from the 17 car's view too. Well, there you go. Matt Kenseth has given our car the old chrome-plated prostate exam. At least our simulated car still rolls, so it shouldn't be too big a deal to get it loaded onto our simulated hauler. Gotta hustle though. Martinsville's infield is so small and tight that it is a nightmare with everyone crowded in there after a race trying to load up. So we're out of the race on lap 31 out of 50, and we were running pretty decent at 22nd when it happened. Honestly though, this is par for the course at Martinsville. Phoenix Racing only finished a race on the track 4 times out of the 13 races that we did there in the Cup car. An oil leak due to damage is what took us out on lap 339 of the real race in 2005. That sucked because we had climbed as high as 22nd and spent a healthy part of that race running in the mid-20s until the trouble occurred. Brakes did us in for 5 of those other races. Brakes are way better now, but it is still tough to make them last the full race. I'm looking at my notes, and that second Martinsville race in 2010 shows us dropping out due to overheating. That is really easy to do if you've taken damage to the nose and either killed your ductwork or holed your radiator. If you think you're going to go to Martinsville and then race the same car the next week, you're nuts. If you haven't killed the car outright, at the very least you are looking at a bunch of bodywork that is going to need replacing. This race is a fight in a phone booth. It's Thunderdome. 43 men enter. You know, the thing. One of the real nice things about Martinsville was that it wasn't too far from the house. It wasn't but a 3¼ to 3½ hour drive from our shop in Spartanburg. Racers are creatures of habit. We tend to stay at the same hotels year after year, eat at the same restaurants, even stop at the same fast food places and travel centers on the van rides. Now I know that one of the big habits we all do at the track at Martinsville is slam back a few of their iconic hot dogs. But I'm going to commit blasphemy here. One thing that has made the van rides more enjoyable these last few years is sheets. They make the food to order. You may have to wait a bit while they prepare your food, but it is worth it. Lots of teams will stop and order breakfast on the trip to Martinsville, either at the one in Reedsville, which is maybe 20-25 minutes from the track, or the one when you first get to Martinsville. And good old Sheets is still open when we finally leave the track after the race. so it is chock full of racers trying to get something to eat as we all drive home. Hand to God, I'd rather pay for one of Sheets' bratwursts on a pretzel bun than eat 10 Martinsville track dogs for free. There's probably two things I was most known for in the garage in the last few years of my career. The first was my bib overalls. All I can say is that I made those black bibs look dead sexy. The other thing I was known for was my ability to sleep anywhere if we had some downtime. The guys did leave me in the garage one time when they rolled the car into tech line, and they were almost through when I finally woke up and went looking for them. I learned to hook my toes under the splitter after that so that it would wake me up when they'd roll the car. Anyway, in 2022 at the fall Martinsville race, we were all waiting for Cup qualifying to end so we could push the Xfinity cars onto the grid. It was going to be a pretty long wait, so I flopped down into the front bumper of the Penske Cup hauler and went to sleep. My teammates said a couple of the safety workers were walking by a bit later, saw me, came over, and one of them nudged me with his toe. They told the guys they thought I had died. Stone the crows. It's lap 43 and another yellow has come out. What now? Looks like Sterling Marlin has ruined Brian Vickers' chance for a decent finish. There ain't a whole lot of laps to get this thing cleaned up and back to green for the checkers. The guy who takes the checkered flag gets one of the coolest trophies in all of NASCAR. It's a big, beautiful, 7-foot-tall Ridgeway grandfather clock. They've been giving them to the race winner since 1964. Richard Petty won 12 of the dang things. Darrell Waltrip won 11. And Jimmy Johnson and Jeff Gordon both won 9 of them. That means those two could each set their clocks to cover the 9 time zones that make up the United States and its possessions. That also means Richard Petty's clocks could span a region that starts in Maine, takes up the entire United States, crosses the international date line, and ends up in the Korean Peninsula. The sim doesn't provide for a green-white checker finish. Actually, the rule as we know it now wasn't standardized in the 3 top NASCAR series until 2004. I think we're just going to have to grit our teeth and make do today. What do you know? We actually finished this sim race under the green, and Carl Edwards takes the win. In real life, Jeff Gordon won the 8th of those 9 clocks of his that we were talking about. We finished in 39th place, which disgusted us no end considering how the car was running during the race. A lot of us Phoenix racing guys were really tired by the end of that race too. We'd sent a skeleton crew to Martinsville because we had to race the Busch Series race at Memphis the day before, and then quick get to Martinsville for Sunday's race. I'm going to let you in on a little secret. Lots of folks say they'd love to race in NASCAR for a living. It's usually fans that say that kind of thing. But life ain't near so glamorous as it seems from the outside looking in. For the road crew, it is long hours, spending a lot of time living out of a suitcase, and you got no real home life. But we do it anyways because it's what racers do. Hell, we ain't good for nothing else anyways. Once again, if you've liked this video, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. And don't forget to like the video too. Maybe we'll see each other at the race this spring. That, or the Rooster Walk come May. Catch you on the flip side.